world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Tuesday, August 18th, as I am recording this. And we got a lot to talk about because there's always a lot to talk about. Now, as I mentioned yesterday, tonight I recorded with the Rational Boomer. Getting to this a little later than I had intended. Planned to record this before recording with Mike, but the night got away from me before I had a chance to sit down and do it. So pulling double duty, getting this recording done, going to get it posted. Might not end up being up until the early morning hours of Wednesday. So I appreciate you bearing with me. If you haven't checked out Mike the Rational Boomer, I encourage you to do so, especially tomorrow's episode of his podcast where I will be the guest. We had a great conversation, and we're going to go over some of the same things here in this show that I went over on there. So one of the things I want to start out talking about is there is this story going around about Natalie Harp. If you don't know who I'm talking about, she is this 35-year-old woman, looks a lot like Ivanka, who goes everywhere with Donald Trump. They're calling her the human printer because apparently she carries a printer with her everywhere she goes. She prints out news articles for Donald Trump, etc. But also in the bag with the printer is also Donald Trump's diaper changing supplies. At least that's according to people who have more sources than I do. Sounds like she may be his home health aide at this point. Now, she is a true believer. Apparently, she was all in. Apparently, she was a right wing media personality at one point, which is no wonder Donald Trump is fascinated by her. He loves people in the media, people who can draw an audience and who said nice things about him. Could she be the next press secretary? Now that Caroline Leavitt is out, maybe. I doubt it. That would mean she wouldn't be able to do the job she's been doing, which is printing out articles for Donald Trump and apparently being his home health aide and changing him, etc. Now, as far as her printing out articles, we have seen this before she was in the picture. She's only been a recent addition to this administration, to Donald Trump and his staff, etc. But if you go all the way back to 2024, when Donald Trump was in court in New York for his 34 felonies, he would come out of court, he'd have a stack of papers, all were news articles with him, and he would talk about all of the good headlines and the polls and all of this stuff, like it somehow proved he wasn't guilty of the things they said, that somehow made a difference. It didn't, because they had nothing to do with the matter at hand, which was the trial. But this is what Donald Trump does. Now, they are keeping him distracted by feeding him articles. This is similar, and he's not going to realize it, but this is very similar to what they did with his father. When his father reached a certain age and started having dementia problems, he was no longer in charge of the Trump organization, the one that Donald Trump ultimately inherited. And they would bring him into the office. They would sit him down in a very similar office. It might have even been the same office he had gone to for years, and they just moved the official CEO office to another room. And they would bring him papers that were meaningless, and they would let him play businessman for hours, where he would have a routine schedule. He would call people into his office, I guess. They would go over things. Um, I don't know if he ever fired anybody, but if he did, I'm guessing they didn't stay fired. They just were never in his line of sight again. Those kind of things, um, to keep him occupied, because that's how he dealt with or that's how they chose to deal with his ongoing dementia. Now, we believe Donald Trump does have dementia, and them printing out favorable news articles is one way of staving off his dementia. It keeps him engaged and talking to him about all of the good things people are saying. Now, he waves these articles around like it's doing something, and what it's doing is showing us exactly how far gone he is. Because realistically anymore, who brings out stacks of printed newspaper articles or magazine articles or just articles from online sources, whatever the case may be? And I know newspapers, for if you are under a certain age, there is a good chance you have never seen a physical paper. You've never read a physical newspaper. They are a dying art. Um, they're just not being used anymore. I know I hear from my parents, I wouldn't say frequently, but at least occasionally, they talk about the local paper from where I grew up. And it's down to, I think it's 2 or 3 publications a day or a week. They are not doing a daily publication anymore. They changed it a while ago because it wasn't profitable. Now they still get the paper because they're of a certain age. They want to sit down and hold the physical paper and read it. They have a hard time with the technology. Now, Donald Trump, to some extent, does have a hard time with technology. He never adapted to a computer. Um, some people have suggested that that is because computers create physical records. He doesn't send emails. Um, he doesn't do a lot of that because that's just not how he is comfortable. So now they're printing him out stories because they can't get him an actual newspaper. Now, maybe he's asking for a newspaper. I don't know, but it is entirely possible. And they're like, well, we can't get you one. This is the best we can do, is we can do this. And of course, they're favorable stories. Now, one of the stories he recently held up, and he was pointing to it. This was over on his social media page. Um, and he was talking about how he's winning, he's getting the job done and everything. Well, the actual article he was pointing to was an article from the Washington Post that said drug prices are coming down, pharmaceutical prices, prescription drugs, those kind of things. And the article, if you actually read it, and we know Donald Trump does not read. That has been something we've known for a while. He doesn't read. If you go back to his first term, his some of the people in the room wrote books, and I can't think of the name of the person off the top of my head who wrote the book, but one of them talked about how his daily briefings, and I don't think he gets those anymore. But presidents are supposed to get daily briefings, uh, and those daily briefings are normally pages long, and they had to skim it down to about 1 page. And beyond that, they had to write it in the way Donald Trump talks. And by that, I mean saying things like, well, you'd be winning if you did this. They would think you are a loser if you did that, and phrasing all of it that way. Now, that is how Donald Trump understands. Donald Trump is functionally illiterate. Realistically, he talks about being a genius all the time, but he barely reads and he is functionally illiterate. He goes ahead and, look at his vocabulary. He doesn't use big words. That's one of the reasons MAGA likes him. He throws out insults, but it's always the same mantra, right? he can't express himself as well as other people. But again, MAGA likes it because while he's not out there using a large vocabulary and giving elegant speeches, he's saying very short, digestible things that they can understand, even if they're false. So he's talking about these pharmaceutical prices and he's saying he's winning, that it's his policies that are bringing it down, and he's making things cheaper for everybody. Okay, but he's not. If you read the article, it points to the Inflation Reduction Act as being the cause of the lowered prescription drug prices, which was passed under Joe Biden. Once again, Joe Biden did something. It took a little bit of time for it to actually take effect and really have a defined impact. And now, here we are. Donald Trump is trying to take credit for it. Same thing with a lot of things that Biden did. A lot of his policies and stuff might not have hit as hard as they could have initially. They took a little bit of time for the whole process to work and work in the way it was intended. Um, and that's one of the things I am worried about when it comes to upcoming elections, both the midterms, which we are going to talk about some updates about the midterms here in a little bit, and the 2028 general. Now, I think the Democrats are going to win both the midterms and the 28 general. My worry, though, is that they are not going to get enough done and that uh, they could end up screwing it up because of, um, not getting enough done, that they could end up souring people on them because people are going to expect it to be something like a light switch. Now, after the midterms, and I still believe Democrats are going to win the midterms. And by that, I mean they are going to take the House, possibly take the Senate. Senate's going to be an uphill fight, but I think they've got a real chance to take the Senate. And uh, when they do, if they have both, I am just afraid that people are going to be looking at what's going on and going, it didn't change fast enough. And they're going to be pissed at the Democrats for not fixing everything fast enough. It's a slow process. Like I said, they passed the Inflation Reduction Act. I think what was it in? Uh, was it in 22 or 23? By the time it finally passed, and we're just now seeing the real effects that part of that legislation had on lowering um, pharmaceutical drug prices, and that is a very real thing here. So Donald Trump is pointing to an article that doesn't even explain away what he thinks it does. He read the headline, claimed victory, and is hoping that nobody around him or nobody that follows him is going to look into it any deeper than that. Now, I mentioned Natalie Harp and how she carries around diaper changing supplies. Um, Pretty sure he wears a diaper. Okay. We've known about this. Apparently, it was a known thing going back to the early days of The Apprentice, that even then he had occasional problems with incontinence. Um, and that apparently, even while filming, he would just let it go and go change himself after. Um, and that they would be filming The Apprentice and he would be sitting there with a full diaper, and the people across we just had to record it and ignore what they could smell. Now, I don't know if that is entirely true, but that is what has been reported. Well, since then, it has only gotten worse. And apparently, um, he has now someone to change him all the time, and that is this Natalie Harp. Now, when I was talking to Mike, the Rational Boomer, apparently she is a full believer, and I knew she was kind of supposedly in love with Donald Trump, but it goes way beyond that with how bad she really is. She is down bad for Donald Trump. Apparently, she has to be extremely close to him. Apparently, there wasn't enough uh, beds in the hotel they were staying in, or enough rooms for her to have a room. She couldn't stay that close to him wherever they were at. So apparently, she slept on the floor of the locker room at one point. Um, and I guess it came out today. I have not verified this story, but I trust Mike that it came out today that apparently at one point they were in a vehicle, um, and there was not enough room in the vehicle for Donald Trump and everybody else, as well as her. And instead of just taking the next vehicle, because those motorcades, when he goes anywhere, there's usually lots of vehicles, and she could have just sat in a different vehicle. But apparently, to stay close to Donald Trump, she put her own safety at risk and rode in the trunk of the car with Donald Trump as luggage, apparently. Now, I don't know if that's true, but if that is a sign of somebody who has actual verifiable um, mental problems. If she did it willingly. Now, I doubt she was told by anybody in this administration to jump in the uh, trunk of the car and ride that way. But most people who are sane and rational would have just taken a different vehicle, taken a different mode of transportation, something. They wouldn't have said, well, yeah, I'll ride the trunk. That's bizarre, right? But apparently, she is such a true believer of Donald Trump's that she is willing and more than happy, apparently, to do stuff like that. Now, what does that all mean? Who knows? Why would she do that? Also, who knows? Apparently, Melania hasn't been seen around Donald Trump for a while. Um, could she be trying to be the next first lady? That could be entirely possible. Um, Mike and I threw out the idea that maybe she is trying to be the fourth Mrs. Donald John Trump, uh, which again, that would be something only a true believer would do. She could be drawn to the wealth and the power that he projects. Um, the whole thing is bizarre and strange on its face. Um, but apparently, that is where we're at. Now, we also talked about the possibility that she could be trying to hone in on the will, and that the whole thing is a ploy to get, uh, financially set for life. Well, now, depending on how the will changes, and if Donald Trump is as far gone mentally as we believe he is, there'd be contested wills, which is possible. Um, and this thing could be tied up in courts for a long time after Donald Trump is gone. If Natalie Harp got a bunch of money in Donald Trump's will, we don't know that is the case, but it's entirely possible. Now, if it's only a small stipend compared to the lump sum of the rest of the estate, maybe they leave it alone. Um, Also thought that maybe she could be vying for uh, to be the mother of his next child. If she's such a true believer, and she is willing, apparently by all accounts, to be the one that cleans him up, etc. Uh, who knows how far her devotion to this man really goes? Either way, there is a problem there, and it does need. I think she's going to need to be seeking some major mental help um, after Donald Trump is gone. Now, on the uh, 2028 midterm front, or 2026 midterm front, as well as the 2028 general. Both things have direct ties right now to something going on here in Iowa right now, and that is the 2026 Iowa State Fair. Now, the Iowa State Fair draws people from around the country. But one of the things it also does draw is politicians, specifically here in Iowa. And there's at least one night where a lot of the politicians go, they do their soapbox, they try to do meet and greets. Um, Last year at the Iowa State Fair, you might remember current Senator Joni Ernst. This was one of the comments that I believe led to her deciding not to seek reelection. When she was asked, well, what am I supposed to do with my child who depends on his Medicaid because of whatever disability the child had? I don't remember the entire story. I wish I did. Um, had medical conditions anyway and was dependent on the payout from Medicaid to keep their child insured and to pay for all the medical expenses. And that was all cut with the one big bullshit bill. And all she said was, well, we'll take it under advisement when we debate it next. Bitch, you already passed it. What were you talking about? And then she wouldn't answer any more questions, and security for her kind of moved this person away. So politicians go to the Iowa State Fair, trying to get name recognition, trying to get the message out there. Well, Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk's uh, group, which really doesn't have the same momentum that it did now that Charlie's gone. They don't have that same mouthpiece. They are not doing nearly what they did when he was around. Now, he might have shown up at the Iowa State Fair and tried to do his bullshit debate. He might have. Um, Difference is he doesn't like to debate actual politicians. He likes to go to college campuses and debate people who don't have all of their ducks in a row and aren't ready for that fight. And it's all about, or it was, I should say, because he's gone, all about the presentation and the show. And he looked like the tough guy for doing this debate. No, he won because he got him to shut up. Well, here we are with the Iowa State Fair. Turning Point USA was bringing in protesters to go against some of the candidates. And when I say protesters, yeah, they were paid protesters that were flown in from out of state to shout down and argue and protest some of the Democratic candidates. But from the videos I saw, the people that were joining in and doing all of this, there wasn't even tens of people. Maybe at most there was 10 people, but I think it was closer to 3 to 5. Um, and it just did not catch on. Um, and one of the things people here in Iowa, we we're not a big outsider state. We like things handled internally, and paid protesters from outside of the state are, even if people agree with their message, aren't always going to be the warmest received. So they're here doing all of it, and they're trying to, talk down Democratic candidates and do this and that. Not having much luck because they don't really have a good argument right now, and being backed by Donald Trump is not the best leg to stand on. But somebody else was in Iowa, and that was the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. Was he in giving speeches talking about the need for the Iran war? Was he trying to talk up recruitment? Was he trying to do any of that? No. Was he talking about conditions aboard ships? As we've heard, the USS Abraham Lincoln is 250 days out from port, hasn't made landfall, hasn't allowed the crew to get off ship, isn't very well supplied. Was he talking about any of that? Not that I'm aware of. Apparently, he is considering a run for president in 2028. Now, adding his name to the list of people I have heard might be running makes the 2828 field for the Republicans a who's who of the biggest fuck ups. And it just shows how I believe the Democrats have the ability to run the table in 28. It's going to be their contest to lose. Now, the comparison I've drawn before and Mike and I drew this comparison when I was on his podcast again today, was that it was compared to the 92 election of Bill Clinton. Now, in 92, it looked like George H.W. Bush was going to uh, sail into an easy reelection. So most of the strong Democrats dropped out of the race. Either they didn't run or said, well, we're going to wait till 96. But Bill Clinton, the governor of Arkansas at the time, who didn't have a lot of national notoriety at the time, stayed in, wins the primary. And in a way, the Democrats were sort of conceding 92. But then the economy turns to absolute shit. So what happens? Democrats win in 92. They ran a nobody candidate because none of the top tier Democrats wanted to run. And I think that's what's going to happen coming up in 2028 for Republicans. None of the top tier Republicans, not that there's many, but and I know they're older, but like Mitt Romney's not going to run, right? Now you could have a Liz Cheney maybe as another top contender, Brian Kemp, Chris Christie, some of those. They're not going to want to run in a year coming off of a Republican president where the economy's shit, uh, their own favorabilities in the shitter, just everything like that going on. They're going to say, well, let's hold out till 32. And if the Democrats don't fix enough on the economy, we can run on, we'll make it better. And we can put all the blame on the Democrats. So Pete Hegseth is talking about making a run. Do I think he's got a chance at 28? No, he is the original DUI hire. I don't think he's going to be Department or Secretary of Defense, at all come 28. I don't think he makes it that long. It would not surprise me if Donald Trump sacrifices him at some point, fires him as Secretary of Defense, and then uses that as his excuse to get out of the Iran conflict. He doesn't have a plan to get out of Iran at all, but um, he has to do something, right? And the whole situation there, uh, that could be his way out. But now, supposedly, Hegseth is making an exploratory bid potentially for 2028. Now, who so far have I heard has been interested? Well, JD Vance would be my odds on favorite for the Republicans because he is the sitting vice president. That makes the most sense to me. Then we've heard Marco Rubio. He would be the other contender. They may even be a power ticket. Some of the other names I've heard are Steve Bannon, who for some reason always looks homeless. And I shouldn't even say that because I know some people who are actually homeless that look better off than Steve Bannon. Um, but anyway, and then now Pete Hegseth. Not a reasonable Republican in the group. Then, of course, you still have Donald Trump floating out his idea of running in 2028, which he legally cannot do. And the way I understand it is and I don't think he's even going to be around in 28 at all, but if Donnie is somehow still alive and kicking come 2028, the way I understand it is if the Republicans would be dumb enough to put him on the ballot as their nominee, that he would be immediately disqualified. Basically, yeah, they'd print the ballots with his name on it, but any vote for Donald Trump would not count, which would mean you would have things like if none of those votes counted, Democrats winning 50 out of the 50 states, and then uh, you would have much larger margins of victory for any of the third party candidates because it would go out of a percentage of the actual legal countable ballots, I believe. So that's what would be there. Now we've also heard that one of the Trump kids might run, whether that is Ivanka, which I don't think she has any want to be anywhere near politics. She's trying to distance herself away from her father. And it would not surprise me if in the future she changes her last name after Donnie's gone to Kushner, trying to distance herself even more. And then you have Eric and Don Jr. Neither one of them, I think, has a remote chance of following in their father's footsteps and actually having any sort of political career. Now, moving on to the 2028 election. One of the things I wanted to talk about before I get into any of these primary results that are up as of right now. Donald Trump has been talking about for a long time. He thinks that the polls should be closed at like 7 p.m. Eastern, and they should be able to have all ballots counted by 11 p.m. Eastern and move on. Okay. Tonight was primary night in Alaska. And now, by all measure, Mary Peltola and Dan Sullivan, the incumbent from the GOP, are probably going to be the nominees moving forward. That just makes sense. Now, they do have I believe it is a jungle primary, so it would be the top two vote getters in Alaska that would move on, and they do have ranked choice voting, which will complicate things as far as their vote count down the road. Okay. But that being said, their polls did not close until 1 a.m. Eastern tonight because of the time difference. And let me just look this up. I believe let's see. Right now, Alaska is that be 4 or 5 hours behind uh, they're four full hours behind. Yeah. So if they closed at 1 a.m. Eastern, that would be what? 12, 11, 10. They closed at 9 p.m. is when their polls closed. 9 p.m. local time. If I am right on my math here. Yeah, 9 p.m. So if Donald Trump wants them to close at 9 p.m. on 9 p.m. Eastern on election night, that would be, let me see here. I found a handy little calculator for it. That means it would close, their polls would close at 5 p.m. Okay, 5 p.m. That is not plausible because a lot of people still have to go to work and typical day jobs do get off at 5. Now I realize we've gone quite a ways from that, but we are um, still, that is something we have to worry about. Um, Now, let's talk. So it's just not feasible, right? And then you add Hawaii in there, which Hawaii, I believe, is another, it's either one or two time zones behind that. It's just not feasible. Donald Trump just wants a reason to complain. Um, so uh, that's where his idea is there of doing that. And because, well, he wants to be able to tweet out on election night exactly how well he won. And also because a lot of states have the same day ballots counted ahead of mail in ballots, which he did mail his ballot in for the Florida primary. I'm going to talk about a couple of the districts here um, in a minute, but he mailed his ballot in. So he doesn't want you to be able to use mail in ballots, but he will. And he wants all of the votes counted early. That way, all of the in person ballots get counted and then they ignore the rest. So, Florida race for governor. This is the primary, by the way. Um, you have Brian Donalds, Byron Donalds, rather, um, is the winner on the Republican side. He's a current sitting U.S. Member of the House of Representatives, but he did not crack 50% of Republican vote. There were almost 600,000 votes against Donalds. Donalds got 810,000 votes. Actually, I am wrong. I just did my math wrong. I didn't realize there were even more votes cast. Um, so if you go down even to the top four that were against Donald's, you are looking at almost as many. Actually, if you go down to the top five, you have as many votes against him as you had for him. Okay. That's not a good sign for the Republicans. That means they could potentially lose in November the governor's race for Florida to the Democratic challenger. Now, who won for the Democrats? That would be David Jolly. Now, you might remember when um, I had um, Jason from Florida on. Drew a blank for half a second, had to think for a minute. We were talking about Florida. He said David Jolly was the better contender. David Jolly got 760,000 votes, which was less than what Byron Donalds got, but he did get 61% of the Democratic vote. So Donalds could end up being the next nominee. Now, trying to remember which district Mar-a-Lago is in. Let's see what this says here. This talks about his endorsements. That doesn't help me. The reason I'm asking is because you might remember that, here we go. This was back in March when a Democrat won the district that Mar-a-Lago was in. That was a state house district. Okay. So that doesn't help me. All right. Let's see. Let me see if I can pull these back up here. Here we go. But anyway, so Byron Donalds did win on the Republican side. Now, looking for there was a special election, I believe, tonight in Pennsylvania as well. State legislature for District House of Representatives 12. I thought I saw something before sitting down to record that there was about to be a decision in this race, but I can't seem to find it now. And it looked like there was yeah. Now, these are unofficial results, but from what I am seeing, it looks like the 12th district, which was a district that went for Donald Trump in a House seat, by plus 18. The unofficial results is making it look like the Democrat is going to win. Now, we were talking about a district with, from what I could tell, 17,000 votes cast. Not a huge number, but still, that makes a difference. Because that's another seat. That brings the total, I think, to 33 or 34 seats, maybe 35 seats, where the Democrat has won and a Republican has not flipped an equal number of seats. And by that, I mean there have been 0 seats flipped from Democrat to Republican since Donald Trump took office. Now, that means this could be a huge chance for the Democrats this cycle. Now, another problematic member of Congress, Corey Mills. This comes from NBC. Republican Corey Mills has lost his primary in Florida. NBC is projecting amid a swirl of investigations and negative publicity, despite running with the backing of Donald Trump. Former television journalist Ryan Elijah captured the Republican nomination over Mills for Florida's 7th District, a seat Trump carried by 12 percentage points in 2024. Democrats have hoped to make it a competitive district this fall, especially with Mills on the ballot. With more than 80% of the expected vote counted, Elijah had 46 to 34 for Mills. Unlike other incumbents who have fallen short this year for being on the wrong side of inter-party divides, Mill was defeated as he has been dogged by multiple investigations, including a House Ethics Committee probe into allegations of sexual misconduct and campaign finance violations, as well as a Justice Department investigation into his finances. He's denied all wrongdoing. But the Justice Department is being run by Republicans, and they're looking into him. Not a good look. Despite his struggles, Mill still got Trump's endorsement. The loss makes him the latest member of a relatively rare set of Republican candidates who lost GOP primaries, even with Trump's blessing. Earlier this month, Representative Andy Ogles of Tennessee also lost his primary with Trump support. I apparently had missed that one, but that's also good news to hear. Mills is the 11th House member, 7 Democrats, and 4 Republicans to lose a primary this year, unusually a high number. Yeah, normally incumbents carry, but there has been some. Elijah ran with support from a slew of prominent Florida Republicans who have either directly referred to Mills' woes, directly or indirectly referred to his woes. Representatives Anna Paulina Luna, Mike Herodopoulos, and took the rare step of endorsing against a House colleague, endorsing Elijah's character. So those are all, that's all bad news for the Republicans. Now that makes that seat potentially better for the Republicans, I should say. But the fact that they're going against their own is a very troubling sign. The Democrats might have a harder time going up against Elijah than they would against Mills. Moving on to Florida Senate race. Now, let's see. That's not the one I wanted. Let's see if I can find it now. I had the results up earlier. Because you had Vindman versus somebody else whose name I can't think of. All Senate races. Why isn't it here? Here we go. I had to go to a different site to find it. I don't know why I couldn't find it on NBC. But apparently, Ashley Moody won on the Republican side with a significant number of votes. Now, let's see here. That was by county. That's not what I wanted. Ashley Moody won the Republican nomination. But everybody thought this Alex Vindman, who did have some name recognition, and he had a rather massive war chest, but he's more center Democrat, maybe even center right, but thought he was going to win. And not only did he lose to Angie Nixon, but lost decisively. He had 552,000 and change for votes. She had just over 705,000. She beat him by about 13 percentage points. Now, looking at the math here, if everybody shows up and votes for the party they voted for in the primary, and nobody switches parties or stays home or something like that, the Republicans still would probably win this Senate seat. However, this is another progressive candidate that just keeps winning. It is going to be sending a very clear message to the Democrats that they've got a problem, right? They are going to have to do a lot in order to right the ship. And that is going to be them going in, or not right the ship, that's the wrong way to put it. They're going to have to do a lot. They can't just go as they have been and stick to the center. They're going to have to start looking toward the progressive front. One thing Mike and I were talking about over on the Rational Boomer podcast is the future of leadership in the Democratic Party in the House and the Senate. And by all accounts, right now, and I'm going to keep saying it until it appears or until the Democrats make a change in leadership, or he says he is not running for leadership, that the leader of the Democratic Party would be in the House of Representatives, or Speaker of the House, rather, for the Democrats if they retake the chamber, would be Hakeem Jeffries. Okay. But they may have to consider going farther left than Hakeem Jeffries. This Angie Nixon, I don't know a lot about. I'm going to have to look into her a little bit. Maybe I will have more on her in one of the upcoming podcasts. But it was definitely a surprise. Now, Florida is rather red, especially with the villages down there and the retirement communities. But I think it is a sign of the times that people are pushing more and more progressive candidates on the Democratic side. And if the Democrats want to keep winning, they are going to have to start going more progressive. You have to lean into that momentum. They can't just keep doing things as they have been. One of the things we also talked about over on the Rational Boomer podcast was the need to shift toward universal health care, and how it's time for the Democrats to just embrace it, give up on trying to salvage Obamacare, and just drag this country kicking and screaming basically into doing it. And after they've had it for a couple of years, it is one of those things where I think people would actually end up liking it. I know several people who hate the ACA or hate the Affordable Care Act, not the Affordable Care Act. They hate Obamacare, love the Affordable Care Act. When they hate it, it's Obamacare. When they love it, it's the Affordable Care Act. And they don't know the difference, that it's the same thing. But now that they've actually experienced it and they've used it and they know what it's all about, and it's not nearly as scary as what the Republicans made it out to be. I've even had them say, "Oh, I'm so glad that they got rid of that Obamacare and replaced it with the Affordable Care Act. It's so much better." And you try to tell them, but it goes in one ear and out the other, because Republican voters aren't the brightest. Donald Trump knows it, and he uses that to his advantage. All right, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. I hope you guys have a great day. I will be back tomorrow with another podcast. Also, don't forget to go check me out on the Rational Boomer podcast for Wednesday. That's going to be that is a good show. I hope you guys all enjoy that as well. So thank you for taking the time to join me. Hope you have a great day, and I will be back tomorrow.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.